This is part two of slavery and the American Civil War. Um, if we go back again a little bit to the slave trade era, so in the Constitution, it essentially says that the slave trade, not slavery itself, but the slave trade, will not be abolished until 1808. And that's sort of a pregnant clause. Essentially, it was suggesting that maybe in 1808 they would, in fact, get rid of the slave trade. And that is what happened. In 1808, it was abolished. So no longer could you bring slaves in, from Africa and other places. But what this actually meant for existing slaves that were already in the United States, that was actually kind of a bad thing for them, because that meant the only way you could get new ones was through generational, through, essentially having kids. So that caused those problems, and also this led to an increase in the internal slave trade. As slavery became much more profitable after the invention of the expansion of the cotton gin, that allowed for short staple cotton to be produced more effectively. That was leading to increases in slavery in areas that could grow cotton effectively in the Deep South, and in some sort of newer areas that have been incorporated in places like Alabama and Mississippi. So this internal slave trade meant that a lot of slaves from the more northern areas that still might be considered the South, like Virginia and Maryland, and even in some cases North Carolina, that there was a lot of sort of trading and selling of the slaves to deeper South areas. So fast forward here to the Civil War period. In the actual Civil War, we're not going to talk much about it. Of course, it's not an American history class. But understanding that African Americans did play a major role in the Union victory. The most obvious way, of course, is them becoming soldiers. But there's other ways as well, that the slaves in many cases rebelled against their owners. They stopped working, they ran away. They just made it a lot more difficult for the Southern way of life in terms of slavery to continue. So there's been many legacies of that, of course. We need to always keep in mind that slavery was not necessarily good for the average non-slave in the South. That only roughly 20% of the whites in the South actually owned slaves. So for a lot of them, what it did is really sort of restricted their economic options. And we have a plane flying over again, and so that's going to be the end of this one as well. So appreciate your time, and we'll see you soon.